All right, welcome back to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast. It is Tuesday. That means we are going over some PGA. It is the Shell Houston Open we're talking about this week. And since we're talking PGA on Tuesday, that means I am here with our two other co-hosts. I'm here with Colin and Pete. What's up, guys?
Hey, Bryan. How's it going?
Doing well. Excited for another golf tournament. And then we have the Masters, so it's kind of the peak season right now for big golf fans. It's great.
Yeah. So obviously we have the Shell Houston Open this week, which, as you can guess, is in Houston. And we'll get into course and then kind of the regular show that we get into. But yeah, it is kind of notable in the fact that it is the week before Masters, which is obviously a fairly big week in PGA. So, but it is nice because, last week we had, I would say, not amazing golfers golfing in the Puerto Rico Open. They were playing in the match play, but this week we actually get to roll out on DraftKings. We get to use better golfers, and I think that'll be a little more fun as we gear up towards the Masters. So let's dive right into it. So the Shell Houston Open. Let's talk about the course. The course is the Golf Club of Houston. So let's get right into it. What sort of course is it? Last week, obviously, driving distance proved to be really important with guys like Finau and even Steve Marino is a really good punt play who drove the ball long. Is this course kind of another long course, or is it going to be a little different? Colin, I'll kick to you first.
So I ran my little course fit routine, and I'm looking as far as who popped. And like the big guys who are fitting on course fit kind of in order in the top group are Keegan Bradley actually popped up high.
Wait. Keegan Bradley?
Yeah. So here's the order: Keegan Bradley, Louis Oosthuizen, and then Henrik Stenson. And so I kind of took a look at all those guys and models, and I was like, okay, what is the thread tying these guys together? And as best I can tell, it's some combination of driving accuracy and GIR. So that's what the numbers are popping out this week. Again, I don't say this is relative to their normal ability, but those guys do pop in player models for decent on those stats. So I was a little surprised at it too. But the Houston Open does have a decent sample size. It goes back 10 years or so. So we've got plenty of data, and that's what's popping.
Man, Keegan Bradley might be the most tilting golfer to own in all of DFS. It's really interesting for me because a guy that I do a lot of daily fantasy stuff with, Birdwings, I think it's the second ranked overall DFS player at this point. He grew up playing golf and he grew up playing with Keegan. And whenever we take Keegan, he just always does so bad for us. But it is interesting that he's popping on this course. He was only 2% owned 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and he is probably because he's tilting like that. You just look at his game log, and it's very boom or bust.
I was once posed this question, Colin. If your life was on the line and there's an 8-foot putt, who would you rather have putting it, Keegan Bradley or Graham DeLette? And keep in mind, Keegan Bradley's putting for the tournament at that point.
Oh, man, I don't like that. Hobson's choice doesn't quite do it justice. That's just I can't even think about that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. He'll be low owned, I imagine, relative to a lot of other guys. But one stat I saw is that I believe it was 7 of the top 15 golfers last year were all in the top 20 in driving distance. So I thought that was initially really important, just looking at the course a little bit. But obviously, going to rely a little bit more on Colin. It sounds like driving accuracy is also very important. So curious to see it. Looks like the par fives are definitely gettable for most of the guys that are relatively long here at this course.
Yeah, and I think it's not necessarily a player stat, but we'll get into weather in a bit. We don't know tee times yet, but I took a peek at the weather forecast for Houston, and it looks like the Friday PM group is going to have a pretty significant wind differential if forecasts are holding up. So definitely wait wind a little bit more this week. I think the Friday PM crowd is going to have a way rougher go of it.
That's a huge edge too. Whenever there's a big difference in the weather for one split Thursday or Friday, that's something that you can really take advantage of, especially wind. Wind is the one thing that absolutely drives these guys nuts on the greens too. So if it's really windy, especially on the back end, that's something we can account for. And I'd actually probably drop everyone starting later regardless.
Yep.
For Friday, I guess, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So a couple questions about the course before we get into, I think, some of the stats. And Colin, I want to kick to you about your article today that you wrote, and then we'll kind of get into the player breakdown. that we do by tiers. Just kind of quickly, course history, recent winners. Last year, JB Holmes won it, and he won it in a playoff. He was 16 under. 2014, Matt Jones at 15 under. DA Points, 16 under. Hunter Mahan, 16 under. And Phil won it back in 2011, 5 years ago, at 20 under. So we're seeing some pretty big scores under par in order to take down this tournament. So kind of just some specific questions about this week before we get into the stats and players. Obviously, this is a notable tournament in that it's right before the Masters. So, Colin, I'll kick to you. Do you think this affects players at all? I mean, obviously these guys, not that they're looking ahead to the Masters, I'm sure it's in their mind, but do you think maybe, obviously some guys are trying to get into the Masters, and then other guys are just trying to make sure that their form is good for the Masters and trying to just get into a groove. Do you think that affects this week at all?
That's a good question. That's one of those research projects I wanted to dive into. Is there anything different about essentially warm-up events compared to majors? People ask similar questions in tennis, I know, for a while back for Grand Slams, and there is a little bit of evidence the top guys just don't treat the warm-up events as seriously. They always fly to Australia to play the local tournaments like Adelaide or something like that, and they underperform a lot. So I think there is at least precedent for it in other sports. Maybe you don't grind as hard and kind of take it seriously for at least for the top guys for the warm-up events. I don't have any data-driven position on it one way or another. I think that's definitely something worth looking to when we get to the British Open, because that actually has a particularly interesting question of, do you play the John Deere Classic versus the Scottish Open before the British Open? But we'll get to that later this summer. So good question. I don't know. That's the short answer.
Gotcha. Pete, do you have any insight to that? Maybe it's more of a narrative street thing than maybe something we can quantify with data.
It's definitely a narrative. And the other interesting thing, too, is does that mean that they're going to play better if they have a lot of pressure? There's so much speculation with some of these guys. One nice thing is, players aren't going to withdraw. They have a lot more to play for. So I guess you can inherently bump someone a small bit just for that reason. But, yeah, that's an interesting question, and certainly something I'd like to look at data for before I make an answer on it.
Cool. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. Another question about the course before we dive into stats and the players is something I found odd is there's a lot of playoffs historically in this tournament. I looked up the actual data behind it. There's been 23 playoffs at the Houston Open, which is the most for any non-major on the PGA Tour. And actually 4 of the last 7 champions have won in extra holes. So my question to you guys is, what gives? Is it just a course where, guys just kill it, and then obviously you can just have a bunch of guys that just shoot really well and they just kind of end up together? Or this is just random variance, or do you have any insights into this, Colin?
I mean, my default assumption is it's variance until proven otherwise. I think of all the tournaments out there, you're going to have one that has at least a lot of playoffs compared to the others just due to randomness alone. It's still really hard to have 2 people tie exactly for first if you think about how random golf is. And so there's just the sheer amount of baseline noise that you have in something like playoffs. I would assume it's randomness. And even if it's not, I would be hard-pressed to figure out how to game plan around it. If you know that there's going to be a tie at first, that's great if you know who it's going to be, but how is that any different than trying to figure out who's going to win? So it's an interesting tidbit, but I really wouldn't know how to plan around that if I thought it was a thing.
Interesting. Pete, you got any thoughts before we kind of move on to the stats part of the pod?
Nope, I'm ready for the stats and some golfers. It's fun to have a lot of good golfers in play this week versus last week where I was lost. So
I disagree. That's the only part where I had edge. It was all data. So
I know Colin differs on that one, but yeah, I'm excited for this week.
Yeah, Pete, I actually think you might have. Maybe we'll get into it when we get to discuss the top golfers. But I would love to figure out how you're incorporating the results from last week's match play, because it's such a different format than normal golf. And so it's how much can you infer from that format to this next week? So maybe we'll get into that with the top guys.
There's some guys that I like because of match play there's things I saw in match play last week that I liked.
Okay, perfect. All right, good. We'll get into those guys then.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Yeah. So, quick plug for us. Obviously, we have our models and our trends and some really cool data. It actually really helped me last week because we kind of identified which stats were important. We can kind of go through that in a second. We talked about how driving distance was important, and we can go into our models and see exactly a guy's long-term driving distance, his recent driving distance, and we can kind of see this for all of our stats. So I would encourage you, if you haven't given the models and trends a try, definitely go onto the site FantasyLabs and give those a shot. You can kind of adjust a model for what you think is important. You can adjust it for how you think the course is going to play this week, and make some lineups. We just rolled out some improvements to our lineup optimizer and lineup builder, so that's really cool. So go give that a shot. So kind of moving on to stats, Colin. Your campaign against strokes gained continued today in an article, and I just wanted to kick to you and let you have your I guess this is your weekly thing now, where you just rant on strokes gained.
Yeah, I promise it'll come to an end at some point. I only have one more, aside from, I guess, like whatever Twitter fights that I get to pick this week. But I guess like the theme of this week was just everybody talks about kind of strokes gain in the abstract, but no one like really is plotting like what are we trying to predict. And it's one thing to know that like golf is really like noisy from week to week, but if you just look at like the thing you're trying to predict in some scatter plots that I have, you see how different golf is from any other sport, where they're like the cut versus no cut, to just see two entirely different groups of data where you don't necessarily know with high confidence who's going to be in what kind of stratification. It's just unlike any other sport that's out there. And so like in the abstract, like you should be skeptical of strokes gained being this magical unicorn metric that cuts through that noise. Like it doesn't change the fact there's a cut, there's no cut, that throws a wrench into everything, and actually put some numbers to it with an actual crude model about, how does conventional data versus strokes gained data do in predicting this really noisy thing. And sure enough, they're not that different. Or like if there is any difference one way or another, it's just drowned in the noise with a really low, like just predictive value. So Pete, I wanted to get your take as far as like, you probably have you've made some plots or data decisions in your day where you can kind of see correlations between fantasy points and other like your key metrics. Like, do you agree with the assessment that golf is just that much of a different animal than anything you've seen before?
It is. And the other thing too is we're really just not getting a sample size. Like baseball, there's so much random stuff too, but you get such a big sample size with consistent variables that you can end up making better decisions based solely on that. So there's a lot of variance in golf, and it really is interesting to think about. And I'm still learning. It's definitely the DFS sport I know the least about. And in general, I think it's one of the sports where you see a lot of these other top professionals. I think there's a lot of variance in these matches, and we're really, I don't know if anyone's really cracked the code like I talked about in our first podcast. So it's something that we're always learning more about. And the other thing too is just with injuries and things of that nature, we just don't have as much information on these guys relative to other sports, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a natural instinct to say like, well, the solution to that variance is to get better quality data. My whole thing with PGA is I think quantity is actually more important than quality, given how like small sample sizes we do have. And that sounds almost like heresy, because like naturally you always want to think quality is better than quantity, but like everybody to my knowledge is just kind of saying that and repeating it, but it's not really borne out by any like application of the numbers. And the one time I tried to do it in this article, like, okay, let's line up strokes gained versus conventional, the numbers don't really bear out so far. The quality is that much better than quantity.
Right. And we're going to continue to get it, though. I mean, the big thing is that this is just how the golf community, this is their stat. So it's their gimmicky stat. So you're fighting an uphill battle with the community in that regard. But it makes sense to me, and I'm really excited to be more data driven. And I'm learning a lot just looking at different stats and using the conventional data that we have.
Yep.
So do you guys think the PGA DFS community uses strokes gain a lot, or is it something that maybe only the sharper guys do?
I think plenty of people do, and like it is useful for like what it does, and that it adjusts how everyone does relative to everyone else. Like it does what it says on the box, but I think it's kind of like, I think we talked about it last week. It's a shortcut essentially. Like why would you adjust conventional data when strokes gained like does the job for you? And it's because like there's edge to be found elsewhere. But I mean, I kind of get why they do it. It's some combination of PGA marketing it really well, and it does have like intrinsic value in itself. I just think it has too many other gaps, but we'll get into that next week. So I don't know, Pete, you're probably more plugged into the kind of the higher end of the DFS. Do you have any insight on how they all settle in strokes gained?
I think most of them are using it. I think a lot of the really top guys are looking at Vegas as well as a big indicator, line movement, things of that nature. And I'm sure there's a variety of other things that, the best guys aren't talking about that they're looking at. But yeah, I definitely think, in the past, I used strokes gained putting a lot for certain courses and would look at strokes gained putting, based on the grass type and things of that nature. And I think people are using that. The tee to green stuff, I'm sure that people are incorporating that into their analysis. It's definitely interesting. I think a lot of people are making subjective decisions too. A lot of these guys that are even playing high stakes golf, they'll admit there's a ton of variance.
Yep, that I have plots to prove that this week for sure.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely agree with all that. Okay, let's dive right into the players then. So like normal, we go through tiers of players, and I've kind of broken it up into 3 different tiers, and we'll kind of take turns going back and forth, picking some favorites from those tiers. And the tiers are as follows. The first one is 9,000 or more. So these are kind of the elite stud golfers. The mid tier I've defined as 7,000 to 8-9 on DraftKings, and then kind of the bargain bin value plays are going to be 6-9 or less. So Colin, I'll kick to you first. Of guys 9K or more, so these are going to be kind of the elite studs for this tournament, the guys with obviously the high Vegas odds to take down the tournament. Who do your models like this week?
So I was actually really surprised at who they spit out this week for the top guys, because I mean, like the guy that has the best, I think, both course history and like fit this week is Henrik Stenson. Just from a pure like odds to win standpoint, he's good. But my top 2 for like the DFS model are actually Dustin Johnson and Ricky Fowler. And I was surprised at that because they don't show up in like they have neutral course fit. Dustin Johnson actually has like a not great course history, outright like veering into negative territory, and yet they came out wise. So sometimes I have to ask myself, okay, why are they spinning it out? And I think we talk a lot about like, if DK prices are traded in Vegas odds, you have to find the difference between Vegas odds and like DFS scoring purposes. And I think the reason they're scoring so high is because I think driving distance is always important for DK scoring. Vegas odds don't care if you go birdie bogey versus par, but I think driving distance is an indicator that like you just have the potential to get birdies. And I think that's way more important in DraftKings. So I think in a relatively like when they're all kind of like equal at the top as far as overall skill level, I think driving distance is kind of this like all-purpose generic tiebreaker that would apply in every situation, and that's why they're coming out on top. And I guess it's early so far, but Dustin Johnson does have the best line movement of all the guys so far, so maybe it's on to something else that I'm not picking up. So I don't know, Pete, what are your thoughts?
All right, I got lots of thoughts on these guys and just what you talked about. So I'm very bullish on the guys who can hit it a long way on this course because of what you explained. You want guys who can make birdies. There's short par 4s on this, and just watching last week with Dustin in particular, he made so many birdies before he finally lost. He had a drive that went 414 yards. It was downwind, but I think he might have caught like a little bit of there's like a little path running through the middle of the fairway that could have bounced hard off of, but he was just absolutely crushing his drives and his wedge shots. And I saw him put so many 80, 90, 100-yard shots within 2 feet of the flag. And he's going to have a lot of opportunities to do that at this course. Looking at it, I mean, there's tons of par 4s that are like 350 to 390. So because of that, I think driving distance is going to be really valuable. You can really go after the short par 4s, and the par 5s are definitely gettable for these guys. Other guys that I like at the top, I definitely like Dustin. He's one of the highest ranked guys for me. Stenson's rating really high as well because of greens and regulation. Watching him, I had him in the Arnold Palmer. He played really well, hitting that 3-wood off the tee every single time. And, he was hitting every green. He just missed so many putts. And that's the tough thing with Stenson. Is he going to make enough of those birdie putts to win? I mean, his ball striking is as good as anybody's. So, and also what he did on 16 was just disgusting. I don't know if you watched, Colin, but when he put it in the water on 16 when he was still in contention with Day.
No, I'm not a golf watcher. Remember, that's my thing. You're the
you don't watch it all. Okay.
I don't have to.
He made an egregious error. He was in the middle of the fairway. He hits his long irons better than almost anybody, and he just there's no reason he could have just gotten easily up and down for birdie, put it where everyone else did to the right side, and he put it in the water and took himself out of the tournament. So it's tough with Stenson when he's right there. He's a great golfer, one of the best ball strikers, but he just doesn't close as well. Which I mean. It is what it is. That's not an important stat that we're really looking at for DFS. But the other guy I really like is Louis. I played him a ton. I guess where I was investing in Louis in the match play throughout the whole process, and he looked incredible. Lost to Jason Day in the final, but he was playing very, very well. Has a really smooth, sweet swing. He's been an incredible golfer, but really been just troubled by a lot of injuries to his back in particular. And he's healthy right now, and I think he's a great player. He's going to be a great player for the Masters as well. I think he lines up great here. And then other expensive guys I think people will look to, potentially Phil Mickelson, who's cheaper than some of these other guys at 10-5. He has great course history here, and he's been scrambling really well. And then one other guy who's right above 9,000, who's one of my favorite, if not my favorite play on the weekend, is Brooks Koepka at 9,300. Yeah. His driving distance is incredible, and he was doing similar things to Dustin, just hitting the ball an absolute mile. And there's some stats I was reading earlier that he's one of the best getting birdies up and down from those short wedges. So I think he's another elite play, and he has pretty decent green regulation too. It's not astounding, but I think he's significantly cheaper than some of these other guys and has just as much upside.
Yeah, I think I was going to mention Brooks, as I think he's the best pure value of the top guys in terms of expected points per dollar. I didn't want to talk.
Sorry, one last comment on Brooks that I meant to say earlier because I know you wanted a commentary on the match play. He played very, very well and just ran into a buzzsaw with Jason Day. They both were doing birdie, and he just ran into Day, who was just playing so well. So he did really well.
Yeah. So Louis is actually an interesting point because I have him rated pretty low, but that's because I'm not incorporating anything from match play into the data. And that's one of the things I'm curious about as far as like how much can you infer from a match play format and generalize it to regular golf. So it's somewhere between like 0 and 100%, right? Because like they're still playing golf. They're still using the same skills that would apply in a normal tournament. But just in terms of, strategic decisions, maybe someone needs to be more aggressive if they're behind a match play so they'll look worse than they are versus like you don't have the same number of holes. Like if you had to give a gut like fraction, how much of the information do you think is like portable from match play to regular play, just from a subjective standpoint?
I think it's really valuable looking at the birdies because that's what, like Rory, I thought, he did very well in the match play. He's a perfect match play type player right now. What's killing him on the course is these double bogeys, but double bogeys don't hurt you nearly as much in match play. What you need is a ton of birdies. And that's the same thing that you need on DraftKings is a ton of birdies. And looking at the guys who made a lot of birdies during match play, I think is a nice value to kind of gain what their current form is from that tournament. Because obviously you don't have all the data that you normally do.
Right. So you kind of have to, obviously normalize that as far as like birdies per hole, because like actually the whole bracket thing kind of brought me back to my tennis days actually, where like, I'm wondering if like someone like Rafael Cabrera Bello, who like got to the semis, I think like he was kind of like
too.
Right, but the thing is, like, I look at him and like this is tennis all over again because he basically benefited from I think like a really weak draw and upsets that were elsewhere in his bracket. Like he got a walkover. He faced a really weak like round, I think in the Elite Eight or whatever. And so I think like sure he did fine in like group play, but like I wonder if people are gonna like just look at like he made the semis and overvalue him this week.
It's really interesting. There's a couple of really interesting critical points here. They originally thought the course was going to set up for more of a precision golfer, and Zach Johnson did destroy. In the first round robin play, he was winning like 5-4, 6-3. It was absolutely unbelievable what he was doing. But at the end, all the bombers won out, and they were saying it wasn't really a bomber's course. But because of the style of match play and how many birdies these bombers are making now, it makes sense. I think that translated directly into DraftKings scoring. So I will see Cabrera Bello. I think he'll be pretty heavily owned. He has a high green and regulation percentage as well. we'll see. It is a decent price.
Well, yeah. Well, no. I mean, we'll get into him in the next tier, I guess. Yep. But yeah, it's kind of an open question as far as like I choose to incorporate nothing for match play. You probably have edge over me this week if we're going like subjective versus objective. It's a blind spot. I'm just wondering how much I'm losing here, or like how much information I'm losing.
If you could incorporate the birdies somehow, I think that'd be the best way to incorporate it. Just from
I think like maybe I'm sure you could do like raw player stats in terms of driving distance, accuracy. It doesn't correlate. It doesn't capture all of it, but like it probably is giving some idea as far as like how they're doing with that stuff. So.
Right.
You think maybe it is something like you could reward players for? I mean, obviously you wouldn't put the data like this, but just kind of. Thinking about you could reward the players who played really well in match play, but not necessarily punish players who didn't play as well. Because obviously, you have situations where a guy has to be a lot more aggressive on a shot or a putt than normal, and obviously that's going to skew his data as opposed when he's competing against the field as opposed to against a guy. So obviously, it's important for guys who are winning and stuff like that, but maybe just less important for guys who aren't. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Like, I mean, again, like we put everything in context. That's kind of a recurring theme here.
Yeah.
But like, it seems like this is everything I'm hearing about this seems like it's more of a subjective decision process. So I guess like as much as it pains me, guys, be more subjective in your decision-making process this week. So it's just
wow.
Yeah, I know. I don't say that lightly, but at some point, reality is reality.
I hear you. So before we move on to the next tier, I got to mention, if we're talking driving distance is kind of important on this course as it was last week. The winner from last year, JB Holmes, has the second highest driving distance. Our recent form is third in long-term form. He's kind of in this tier. He won it last year, beat Spieth in a playoff last year. Is this kind of the same situation, Colin, where I normally ask you how you feel about the guy who won it last year and you auto fade because of ownership rates, or do you think that Holmes has a semi-decent chance to do pretty well?
I mean, I don't. It's going to be tough for me to not auto fade last year's winner just because I think they're overrated. I mean, they're overpriced usually. Yeah. He's got decent course history. I actually have him as neutral course fit because his like accuracy isn't like super great or
his accuracy is pretty bad.
Yeah.
He sprays it, man. He gets that push going sometimes for sure.
Yeah, but I just think that like if you had to choose between the two, I think like Brooks Koepka just rates higher than JB Holmes for all the same reasons, and he's cheaper. So there are better alternatives under 10,000. So or I guess there one specifically. Just Koepka. Holmes seems to be dominated by Koepka in all the relevant categories. So, yep, JB Holmes still fade.
Same for me. I think he's a decent play. It wouldn't surprise me if he did well here, but he'll be over-owned and his driving accuracy's down. I think Koepka's a much better player. And there's other guys, Dustin Johnson in terms of value, I think is much, much higher than JB Holmes. And we'll get into some guys. There's a lot of value here, especially if you like Keegan. He's rating high for me, and I see why you like him, Colin. The nice driving accuracy there for Bradley.
And I guess the one guy that's worth mentioning, I mean, I think everyone thinks that Spieth is playing way below his level right now. Do you think, and he's priced really high too, Pete, is this enough of it sounds like it's good for a contrarian play. I don't do a whole lot of GPPs, but is he bad enough that he's not even worth a contrarian flyer, or what are your thoughts on that angle?
I don't think he's bad enough. He did say it was a really interesting thing when he played bad in the last day of the match play, because he played really sharp in the group play. He looked really, really good, looked like himself. But then he got bounced against Louis, actually, and I thought that was a great investment opportunity because Louis was playing well. And, Spieth is always going to be a crowd favorite. But Spieth did say, that day when he played poorly, he got to the range, and he was just randomly hitting slices. And he says that never happens. And then one of the announcers went into his grip and all this stuff and why it can happen. So he's definitely trying to fine-tune his game right before the Masters. I definitely think he's a pretty good tournament play. He's never going to be a great tournament play as just a contrarian pick because of his name. Too many guys are going to look at Jordan Spieth and just say, hey, I'm going to take him because I like him. But he's definitely interesting relative to other weeks where his ownership's going to be sky high coming off big wins or whatever.
Yeah, I was curious as far as how badly does Jordan Spieth have to play in order for the average player to not pick him.
Right.
Ownership. You have way more.
It's going to take a lot of time. People love him. So
okay, yeah, that was more idle curiosity.
And his odds are still. I mean, he's obviously the heavy favorite in this tournament. He's at 13% implied odds to win the Houston Open. Next guy is Ricky Fowler at 8. So definitely heavy favorite. So even kind of the bad recent play, Vegas still is high on him as they should be. Cool. Speaking of Keegan, your favorite guy, Pete. Let's move to this next tier, which again we will set the parameters of that at 7K to 8-9. And Pete, I'll kick to you and let you give your kind of favorite middle of the road plays from that range.
Well, it's not Keegan off the bat, but maybe I could be convinced on him. One of my favorite guys overall is Ryan Palmer. He hits the ball a really long ways. I think he's just still a little undervalued. Barely made the cut for us with the Arnold Palmer, which was nice. But he has a lot of pro trends in our models, and I like him quite a bit. I just think he's undervalued at that price. And that same price range, I think Finau is an interesting tournament play. Played really well for us. We didn't get him right with the Puerto Rico Open. Just on the driving distance, he's not as good of a golfer as the rest of these guys, and maybe he's a little expensive relative to where he should be. But in terms of a tournament option, I think he's great. Most interesting decision for me is probably on Rafael Cabrera-Bello. I butchered the pronunciation earlier, but hopefully that was a little bit closer. He's going to be pretty popular, I think. He has a really great green in regulation. He did look pretty good last week, losing in the semis. He's a guy that doesn't have the driving distance per se, but he's not awful either. But he's rating decently well for me in my models. And then Graham DeLette is somewhat high, which I'm probably not going to take him. But that's just because I have greens in regulation weighted pretty heavily here. So he also has decent driving distance as well. And I won't be rostering him, but he's definitely popping a little bit in my model, which scares me a lot. It's probably because I have too many recent stats weighed right now. But Colin, I'm curious on those thoughts. I definitely won't be rostering DeLette, but he is popping for me.
So my number one guy with a bullet in the mid tier is Brendan Steele.
He rates high for me too.
Yeah, he always seems to pop like in a lot of my models. I think he's just kind of like he just has too many like essentially like top like 25 or 30 finishes. Like on the occasion that I like sweat the leaderboard, he always seems to do like really well the first 2 or 3 days and just like craps the bed on Sunday. Pete, is that you actually watch golf? Is that consistent with how he does? He just can't.
That's what happened last week too. He could or 2 weeks ago in Arnold Palmer. He's a great play. He's actually rated higher than any of the golfers I mentioned in my model, and I just missed him.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree. So like my top 4 are in this range are probably Steele, Palmer, Finau, and Keegan Bradley. So I agree with all of that. On the Rafa question, again, it's the same thing where I don't have his match play results incorporated. And so maybe I'm missing something there. But even kind of like just clicking on his game log or whatever, you know how big I am on all things long-term form. There are just like he kind of, it looks like he kind of turned it around a little bit on the Euro Tour, but like a good 10, 12 tournaments here on Euro. And there are 3 missed cuts on the Euro Tour and like a couple like not so great made the cut finishes here. So I think he just has a lot weighing him down from his long-term form here for me to like him.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think that's just like no one really looks at Euro Tour results or knows how to incorporate them really well. But I know enough that it seems to be weighing him down too much. I just can't pull the trigger from a long-term perspective.
It's just so interesting to me. There's 2 things that pop, and then the rest is bad relatively for this week. The number one thing is his greens in regulation based on the data we have. He's at 74.1%. Henrik's at 75, but then no one else. I mean, Stuart Sink at 72.1, but then everyone else is significantly lower than that. So I love that for this course. And I do love how he played last week, but then everything else just isn't as great, and he's probably going to be overvalued. So he's definitely a decision for me. I probably won't be playing him, but he's definitely interesting this week.
Yeah, I mean, he rates as a hard and easy fade for me. So, like, I think that's the first time where that's the furthest apart we've been on a player. So, I mean, that's I guess
he
like,
rates bad in my model. That's the interesting thing. It's just that one, just sorting by greens and regulation and last form, he pops. So that's the interesting thing.
Other decent values in this range, I think Patrick Rogers and Gary Woodland are pretty good for their price.
Woodland's a great play, I think.
And then and the other guy, Pat and Kazir, like the rookies are all like, yeah, I think that they're all decent if you need to save a little bit more money. But I think Brendan Steele is going to save you so much money for all of your other decisions that you'll have plenty to work with.
Right. Kazar's been written up by a bunch of other people, and I think he'll be a pretty popular play just based on, the other people touting him. I definitely like Woodland. I should have brought him up. He's one of my favorite plays in this range, especially in tournaments. He is super long, and he could definitely have a great tournament or a bad one. He's more of a tournament play for me, but I think he has pretty decent course history here. I'm not sure. Can't remember if I read that right, but I like Woodland quite a bit.
Yeah, some just kind of quick data points. We've been tweeting out some of our data today from the FantasyLabs PGA Twitter. We're talking about Zaire and Brendan Steele as well. Both have made 6 straight cuts, and both have really good data for this week. So yeah, I like those as some picks in that kind of mid range. Anyone else you guys want to talk about in that 7K to 8-9, or you want to jump into bargain bins?
I think I'm good with bargain bins.
Cool. Yeah, let's go to bargain bins. I probably won't be playing many of them, but there's interesting guys if you want to do tournaments.
Interesting. So that could kind of lead us into finishing up with some maybe salary or roster construction, because there's not going to be many lower end guys. It's probably going to be hard to fit in the Spieths and the top guys. Okay, so Colin, I'll kick to you. So the lower end guys, these are going to be 6-9 on DK or less.
Number one with a bullet this week is Hudson Swafford. And I think I've mentioned him before as far as a guy who seems a pop, but he has a decent number of made cuts. And I think this week, we talked about how driving distance is generally important. He's sitting there he's at like 300, so like 299.9, okay, close enough. And it's just really tough to find someone who has like a driving distance of at least 300 average and costs that cheap. Like everyone else who does, like their other stats are just that terrible that like they're just generally not good golfers. But he has like enough of the rest, I think, in the rest of his stats where it's like, okay, 6,000 is just too cheap for someone with that amount of distance. Maybe I get it why his price is so low, because he doesn't have great odds to win. But that, I think, is that discrepancy between Vegas odds and DK scoring pricing that we're kind of looking for in our bargain bins. The other guy that pops really well, I think, this week and pretty much every week is.
You're gonna steal him again. I know it. Though I only have 2 guys, and
I haven't mentioned him before. This is actually my all-time favorite cash game pick every week to week is this guy Ches Reavie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like he is actually like probably my best kept secret because he's never more than 3% owned. But just like if you look at his results, it's something like this year, it's like like 10 out of 12 made cuts, and like the ones he missed were literally by a stroke. So he's just that like stereotypical guy where it's just like probably never going to win a tournament, but just like posting solid top 30, top 40 finishes, and his odds never seem to adjust accordingly. So he's in that sweet spot where like he's just a frozen value play that like it's just he has a great chance to make the cut. So
he's made 10 of his last 12 cuts dating back to the opening of the tour last October.
Yeah, and the ones he missed were by a stroke. So like that's something. If you don't pay attention to that stuff, that's why he slips under the radar. So
good call.
Swafford, Reavie, and then the other guy, I guess my best guy under 6,000 from a pure value is Jim Herman. I think he has. What am I looking at for Herman? Why is he popping so high? Yeah, his course fit is really great. Probably percentage-wise, probably the best among. He has decent course history. If you really need to go stars and scrubs, he's probably my favorite, like super bargain bin.
Love the calls. I was going to bring up Swafford for sure. Or Swafford. Is it Swafford? Is that right?
No, you watch these games.
I watch them. I should know. So we got someone on Twitter was busting us on the pronunciation of these names. Yeah. I play hockey every day. I'm terrible with hockey. I know most golfers, but a couple of them I don't. Hudson, we'll go with Hudson for sure. I like him a ton of upside with that driving distance, like you mentioned. And if you want a team with like Dustin Johnson, Phil Mickelson, or something like that, he's a great way to kind of unlock that. Like him quite a bit. I thought you were going to mention Adam Hadwin because he's the other guy who pops quite a bit. They're both in that 70 ranking or 70 rating range. Those are the only two guys really in the tier that we're talking about that rate well at all for me. Reedy is not bad. He's in the low 60s for me. I think he's interesting and definitely a consistent cut maker, which is what you want really in your cash games. You want the best guys in your lineup that you really feel have a chance to make a lot of birdies and win the tournament. And oftentimes that's going to be expensive guys. And then with your cheapies, you don't really care what they do other than just please make the cut. That's really what you're hoping for. So if you can find someone who's consistent, who's consistently cheap like Reedy, that makes sense to me. And outside of that, there's just not that many great guys that are popping for me. David Toms for dirt cheap looks okay based on my model. I don't think I'd ever play him. Outside of that, it's pretty ugly, to be honest, with these guys that are cheap. Like John Senden is another guy who ranks high, and I just can't imagine rostering him either. So just those couple guys. And I think this week in terms of roster construction, you can really make a balanced lineup. Palmer and Steele are just way too cheap. You get great value there.
Yep.
And then Koepka is another guy I really like. I mean, just starting with those three, you kind of keep yourself in that, salary range that you need to be in. And then there's a ton of options and a ton of directions you can go. So I don't think I'll need too many bargain bin guys. If I were to roster one in like a cash game type thing or, like a 1K tournament where you can kind of take a more, conservative approach relative to the other GPPs, it'd be Hudson who I'd roster for really cheap.
Cool. I guess we'll end it there. And some quick questions before we head out. Obviously, next week is going to be the big tournament, the Masters. We have a lot of good stuff planned as far as content and obviously podcasts and some other stuff which we'll announce later. But I kind of wanted to get you guys' thoughts before we leave on, what to look for in this tournament. Pete, I know you're big on narrative, so what are you looking for exactly in this tournament as these guys lead up to the Masters? Are you kind of looking how they putt, whether they're hitting greens or just kind of overall game?
Most of it's just game theory stuff that I'm going to be considering for these last couple of weeks because DraftKings puts out the Masters pricing well in advance. So last year they did that, and JB Holmes obviously won this tournament, was super heavily owned in the Masters. So the guys who have success over especially in this tournament are going to be more heavily owned in the Masters. So something you might look for too is someone who doesn't do as well, and maybe they just catch an unlucky break. I'm not sure how important that is. That's something I'm always watching when I'm, looking at, watching golf. Did they just hit a ball that bounced the wrong way into the water and it was just a very, very unlucky break, or were they really just hitting terrible shots? And that's something that I'll try to pay attention a bit to this week. And then in addition to that, just incorporating some of these guys who are in great form, like Louis, who I think is going to be an elite Masters play. If he plays well again here, I'm actually rooting against that because I want to roster him for the Masters more. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about during this time. But Keegan's another guy. That's the thing I'm most curious about this week now is Keegan because Colin likes him, and he's always a polarizing one. And I definitely am excited to watch and see how he plays.
Cool. I guess we'll end it there. Colin, you got any last thoughts on this week or Masters week or?
Masters week. I'm looking forward to. I don't think Pete and I actually fight enough over players enough, and so I think
I think you will.
Who do you like to win the Masters right now? Gun to your head.
Jason Day.
Jason Day. Okay, I take one person. I take Rory right now, but I think the guy that I like the most for the value, just in terms of likelihood, still like up there in one of the top 5 guys to win is Bubba. I think Bubba could easily win again this year.
Oh yeah, I mean he's always up there for sure in course history alone. But I think the Masters is probably I'm looking forward to the most because it's the only major where we're going to have solid course history data, and debatably that it's probably the most fertile for narrative street and subjective decision.
Absolutely, with the greens the way they are and just course knowledge there is really big.
Yeah, and I believe that that's probably something that data isn't as good as picking up necessarily. So I'm hoping that we disagree over more players because I think that's where the discussion will get really interesting and trying to maybe we'll actually try to solve it.
I think we might disagree a little bit. What I think will be really interesting and what's going to be so fun about the Masters is they made the pricing really loose. So you can make just these all-star teams, right? It'll be debates like, do you like Koepka more or Louis more or whatever. I'm sure we'll have a strong opinion where I'll really love one guy at a certain price and then you'll like someone a lot more at the same price. That's what I'm really excited for.
Yeah,
that's what's going to, decipher who wins the big money. And it is one of those weekends where you can invest a lot. And that's what I'm really excited for. I'm still up on the couch. So watching the Masters is like the best experience ever, and having a sweat on it with DFS is great. So I'm looking forward to that a lot.
All right. Well, will you watch them so I don't have to? I'm going to be on a plane anyway, so that's your homework assignment.
Perfect.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. You're right, Pete. They now released the prices on these Masters guys so early, and it's kind of just interesting that they would do that, or really just kind of any DFS contest. Because if you think about it, like prices are very static. Once they're released, they're not going to change. Whereas data, our models, and the last couple of weeks we have new data coming in, and really any sports like that. Any new data after pricing is obviously not going to be priced in just by nature. So it's interesting. We have the static nature of the salaries, but the dynamic nature of the data. So maybe you can find some edges there. But Colin, man, you're all about the data, and you're telling us to be more subjective this week, and now you're giving in a narrative street already for Masters.
I'm not giving in a narrative week. I want to argue narrative street, and so I think data versus narrative is like the Masters is probably the perfect place for those guys to show down.
Oh, yeah. It's gonna be fun, and
cool.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of fun. DraftKings, someone will be a millionaire. Hopefully it's one of us or one of our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. One of us is great. I like that idea. But yeah, one of our listeners would be great too. And we'll end it there. Thank you for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're watching this, good luck this week, Houston Open. And as we get prepared for the Masters, we'll be announcing some cool things that we have next week, content, podcast shows, all sorts of things. So thanks again. Good luck. And we'll talk to you guys next week.